Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to talk about Alexander the Great, who is right here on the right. He was one of the youngest military officials to create one of the largest empires in the history of the world.
I am the champion. I am the champion. No time for losers, 'cause I am the champion of the world.
So this should be section 4, and it'll be our last section of the unit. The Peloponnesian Wars, which you should remember happened between Athens and Sparta and the various allies that they were able to collect, really weakened the Greek city-states. This caused a really rapid decline in all of Greece's military and economic power. There was a nearby kingdom of Macedonia that was led by a guy named King Philip II, and he was watching all of this happen. It just so happens King Philip actually viewed himself as Greek, but as Greece was in decline, he felt like he was maybe the power figure to kind of reaffirm Greece's glory. Philip dreamed of taking control of not only Greece, but then moving against Persia to seize its not only vast wealth, but also to avenge the Persian invasion of Greece in 480 in the Persian Wars. So we're going to talk about this kingdom up here called Macedon or Macedonia, and this is where King Philip is from, right up here. Philip builds a Macedonian empire. So the kingdom of Macedonia is located just north of Greece. It has really rough terrain and a cold climate. And the Macedonians are really hardy people. They live in the mountain villages rather than in city-states, so life's a little bit more difficult. Most Macedonian nobles thought of themselves as Greeks, as Philip II did. The Greeks, however, kind of looked down upon the Macedonians and viewed them as kind of uncivilized foreigners who didn't have any great philosophers or sculptors or writers. The Macedonians did have one very important resource. They had shrewd and they had fearless kings. King Philip II is the one that you just saw on the last screen. King Philip's army. In 359 BC, Philip became king of Macedonia, and though only 23 years old, he quickly proved to be a really brilliant general and a ruthless politician. King Philip transformed the rugged peasants under his command into a really well-trained professional army, took the ideas of the phalanx, but he organized his troops into phalanx of 16 men across and 16 deep, each one armed with an 18-foot pike. Philip then used this heavy phalanx formation to bust through enemy lines, and then he also incorporated the use of cavalry to crush. As soon as he disorganized his opponents, he used cavalry units and smaller units to kind of come in and crush from the sides. After he employed these tactics successfully against northern opponents, Philip began to prepare for an invasion of Greece. The conquest of Greece. Demosthenes, who was an Athenian-like speaker and orator, tried to warn the Greeks of the threat of Philip and his army. He urged them to unite against Philip, but the Greek city-states, they were too busy arguing and could not agree on one single policy. So in the last minute, in about 338 BC, Athens and Thebes decided to get together, and Thebes is actually a city-state in kind of the central part of Greece, and they decided to join forces to fight against Philip, but it was too late by then. The Macedonians soundly defeated the Greeks at something called the Battle of Chaeronea. The defeat ended kind of Greek independence, and the city-states, though they were able to retain some self-government and local affairs, Greece itself remained firmly under the control of a succession of foreign powers, the first of which was Macedonia. Philip planned to invade Persia, but he never got a chance. He was at his own daughter's wedding in 336 BC when he was stabbed to death by a former guardsman. Philip's son, Alexander, immediately proclaimed himself king of Macedonia, and because of his accomplishments over the next 13 years, he would become known as Alexander the Great.
To infinity and beyond!
A little bit about Alexander the Great. Can you please listen for a couple of facts that you could add to the margins of your notes after you write a little bit about Alexander?
One of the most remarkable men of all time, who did quite a bit of wondering, was Alexander of Macedonia, who lived more than 2,300 years ago. He was born in 356 BC, to be exact. Macedonia is a part of Greece, at the northern end of the Greek peninsula. In Alexander's time, Greece was made up of many independent states. Alexander is remembered as a world conqueror, one of the outstanding generals and military strategists of all time. But he was also a great explorer, a man with a curious mind who had to know what lay behind every mountain and every river that barred his way. As a boy, Alexander was a pupil of the great philosopher and teacher Aristotle. When Alexander was 20, his father, King Philip, was assassinated, and the young prince took the throne and command of the army. By the time he was 30, he had conquered and explored an empire that extended from Egypt to India.
Although Alexander was only 20 years old when he became king, he was really well prepared to lead. He had been tutored by Aristotle, and he had learned about science, geography, literature, and he especially enjoyed Homer's description of the heroic deeds performed by Achilles during the Trojan War. To inspire himself, it is said that he kept a copy of the Iliad under his pillow as he traveled throughout the empire, and this is just a preview of how far his troops and his empire are going to spread and reach. Pretty incredible. So, a quick story about Alexander. When he was only about 8 or 9 years old, he tamed a wild horse that none of his father's grooms could manage. Alexander calmed the horse, whose name was Bucephalus, by speaking really gently. Seeing the control that Alexander had over the horse, Philip said, "You'll have to find another kingdom. Macedonia isn't going to be big enough for you." Alexander took his father's advice, and riding Bucephalus at the head of a great army, he conquered the lands from Greece all the way to the Indus Valley. When the horse died in what is now Pakistan, Alexander named the city of Bucephala after it. Maybe he was tired of the name Alexandria, because by then he had already named at least a dozen cities after himself. As a young boy, Alexander learned to ride a horse using weapons, command troops. Once he became king, Alexander promptly demonstrated that his military training had not been wasted. When the people of Thebes rebelled against the early Macedonian rule, he destroyed the city. He killed about 6,000 Thebans. The survivors were sold into slavery. Frightened by his initial cruelty, the other Greek city-states quickly gave up the idea of rebelling against him. The invasion of Persia. With Greece now secure, Alexander felt free to carry out his father's plan to invade and conquer Persia. In 334 BC, he led 35,000 soldiers across something called the Hellespont into Anatolia, which is also called Asia Minor. Persian messengers raced along the royal road to spread the news of the invasion. An army of about 40,000 men rushed to defend Persia, and the two forces met at Granicus River. Instead of waiting for the Persians to make the first move, Alexander ordered his cavalry to attack, and leading his troops into battle, Alexander smashed the Persian defenses. Alexander's victory at Granicus alarmed the Persian king Darius III. Vowing to crush invaders, he raised a huge army of between 50 and 75,000 men to face the Macedonians near a place called Issus. Realizing he was outnumbered, Alexander surprised his enemies, and he ordered his finest troops to break straight through the weak point in the Persian lines with his big 256-man phalanx, and then charge straight for Darius. To avoid capture, the king turned and ran, followed by his now panicked army. The victory gave Alexander control over Anatolia. Conquering the Persian Empire. Now shaken by his defeat, Darius tried to negotiate a peace settlement. He offered Alexander all of the lands west of the Euphrates River. Alexander's advisors urged him to accept. However, the rapid collapse of the Persian resistance fired Alexander's ambition, and he rejected Darius's offer, and confidently announced his plan to conquer the entire Persian Empire. Alexander marched into Egypt, a Persian territory, in 332 BC, and the Egyptians welcomed Alexander as a liberator. They crowned him pharaoh, or god king, and during his time in Egypt, Alexander founded the city of Alexandria at the mouth of the Nile. After leaving Egypt, Alexander moved east into Mesopotamia to confront Darius. The desperate Persian king assembled a force of some 250,000 men and met at a place called Gaugamela, a small village near the ruins of ancient Nineveh. Alexander launched a massive phalanx attack, followed by again the cavalry charge, and as the Persian lines crumbled, Darius again panicked and fled, and Alexander's victory of Gaugamela ended Persian power in the area. Within a short time, Alexander's army occupied Babylon and Susa and Persepolis. These cities yielded huge treasures. Hang on. The Greek historian Arrian, a little bit further back. These cities yielded huge treasures, and when Alexander distributed these amongst his army, he gained the support and love of his men. Some people said Alexander left the city in ashes to signal the total destruction of the Persian Empire. The Greek historian Arrian, writing about 500 years after Alexander's time, suggested that the fire was set in revenge for the Persian burning of Athens. However, the cause of the fire, it remains a mystery. So here he goes heading down into Egypt, where the Egyptians meet him as a liberator. He names Alexandria after himself, takes control of this region, heads east, to Persepolis. We'll talk about this path tomorrow, which is this movement into continuing to track down Darius. So this is where he is as of now.
Alexandria in Egypt still bears his name today. This city, which he founded in 332 BC, eventually became the location of the world's first great library. In turn, it has been a center of Greek, Roman, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish culture and learning. At the time that Alexander became king, the city-states of Greece were in great danger, from themselves, because they were always fighting each other, and from the Persians, whose expanding Asian empire had reached the gateway to Europe. So Alexander took it upon himself to unite the Greek states by force of arms. And then he turned eastward against the Persians. But there was something very unusual about Alexander's army. Wherever they went, they took along philosophers, poets, historians, geographers, zoologists, botanists, engineers, surveyors, and many other technicians and scholars. Men who could observe, analyze, and record the wonders of the world that were unfolding before them. Alexander's travels and conquests took him across mountains and through burning deserts. In battle after battle, he crushed the Persians and their allies. And at every opportunity, he made careful records of the geography and natural history of the places he visited. He sent thousands of specimens home to his old teacher, Aristotle, at Athens. Alexander took his army through Asia Minor, down to Egypt, and then through Babylon and Persia, as far as Turkestan and the borders of India.